Christmas by H.P. Lovecraft. The cottage hearth beams warm and bright. The candles gaily glow. The stars emit a kinder light above the drifted snow. Down from the sky a magic steals to glad the passing year, and belfries sing with joyous peals, for Christmastide is here. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and glad tidings, or good tidings, either way. I am one of your hosts, Aaron.
And I'm Mike. Happy holidays.
And we like the spooky stuff here on the People's History of Horror podcast.
You don't say.
Yeah, that's what we lean for. And lucky for us, there's plenty about Christmas, Yuletide, winter solstice, etc., the closing of the year, that's spooky. Like spooks, for example. So a lot of the whole pagan origins comes from, trying to cast away the evil spirits. And I figure that's where we'll start, is the origins of Christmas, because that alone has some spooky shit about it.
Like, did you know that the whole ornaments on trees was actually witchcraft? It was little glass balls that they had hanging around to ward off, or not witches, but, well, not witchcraft, but to ward off witches.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of fantastical beasts and folklore and various myths and everything, and we can get into some of that. Like I said, the origins of most of the festivals that happen around this time of year really is just they're either burning away or beating away the bad year and basically making room for the good year, or so they hoped. So December 25th was really, they're closer to their New Year's celebration, and I guess back then all of the various holidays kind of got roped in together, which Halloween and Christmas, as far as the old ancient traditions, are very similar holidays in that way.
They were creepy as fuck.
Yeah, that's where caroling originated, is basically the same thing as trick-or-treating.
Dude, caroling was brutal. So, it was the rich hated caroling because, the poor would gather around and carol outside of their house. But it wasn't these nice, sweet Christmas songs. It was shit they just made up on the fly. And it was usually, brutal, threatening, basically give us some shit or we're going to fuck up your property. And if you didn't give them something, they would fuck up your property.
And then that's where, a lot of, it was called wassailing, as far as, the Germanic origins of it. And, that's where we get the caroling thing. And the drink that they use is a strong punch. Is, the punch bowl at all of your family Christmas gatherings, it's the same thing. Except, in some of our cases, it was alcoholic, but it's not necessarily nowadays quite as often, I suppose.
Now that I'm the adult, it's spiked.
But, that was that thing and because the ability to have a large punch bowl of various fruity liqueurs, that was more of a middle class, upper class thing, and so a lot of the lower class, they would get together and go from house to house and tap on their window, looking in and hey, let us in and get some of that, that there fine beverage of yours. And
it's Christmas.
Yeah, and so obviously there's a lot of details and all of that we can get into, but that's where a lot of these traditions and such come from. A lot of the carols originated in that way. Some of them have changed and altered, and we have newer ones and everything. But I figured that would be a good place to start. And so, coming along with that, one of the creepier elements of this wassailing, caroling tradition was a creature, I suppose, called Merry Wold. It's a Welsh tradition. And part of their going from house to house and doing this is they would have this horse head puppet thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I was unable to really find out if that or the crazy evil, spooky stories that kind of came with Marywold. I don't know which came first, but either way, it's a horse head creature that eats bad children, which is gonna continuously come up here today.
That's a theme for sure.
So speaking of spooky stuff like Marywold, and obviously I really like cats, and so any myth or legend that involves a cat, like, I'm gonna be all about. And so one of my favorite ones have always been the Yule cat, and you were telling me all sorts of stuff about that. So go ahead.
Yeah, the Yule cat. That's some Icelandic folklore. So let me back it up a little bit. I'll get to the Yule cat, but let me start with Grilla. Grilla was an ogress, giant ogress who eats the flesh of mischievous kids, whom she cooks in a large pot. Her husband mostly just sat around. He was lazy. Don't even care about his name, because honestly, he just sat around. He didn't do shit. Well, she had the Yule cat. That was her pet. It was this huge, vicious cat who lurks about the snowy countryside during Yule and eats people that didn't get new clothes to wear before Christmas Eve. Now, most likely the reason for that legend is to motivate workers to get all their work done, because employers would give new sweaters to the workers if they completed all their work before Christmas. So that's kind of why you see where that's going. Grilla also had sons, the sons of Grilla, or better known as the Yule Lads. They were 13 mischievous pranksters that steal from and harass the public. Excuse me there. All of them have names describing their favorite way to harass people, and they leave small gifts and shoes that kids put in windowsills, unless the kids were bad. Then they would leave a rotten potato. Pretty gross, right? So, you ready for their names? And forgive me if I mispronounce some of these, because they are fucking weird. Here we go. You got Sheepcoat Cod, Goolygawk, Stubby, Spoon Licker, Pot Scraper, Bow Licker, Door Slammer, Scare Gobbler, Sausage Swiper, Window Peeper, Doorway Sniffer, Meat Hook, and Candle Stiller. I don't know if they sound more scary or just annoying, but yeah, that's the Icelandic folklore. That's where the Yule cat comes from.
And so one of my favorite things about stuff like Grilla and her cats and her sons and all of that, like, the cat rips open children and stuff, and like you said, a lot of that is just motivation for children to behave, which obviously there is a lot of that around Christmas.
There's also a lot of motivation for workers to get shit done.
Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, a lot of that is you want Christmas off, don't you? And we see a lot of that, and we'll just go ahead and throw this one out there, A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens story. Like,
all right, people don't think about it. That's a Christmas. That's a horror. I mean, he's being haunted literally by 3 different ghosts. Come on,
mm-hmm.
That's a horror story.
And it's something like that where
it's
a lot of
scary one.
A lot
of
of
horror story.
A lot of people don't realize, like, one of the person that I'm going to bring up next, which is a big one, but something like A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, 19th century story. That was really before the, shall we say, capitalization of the Santa Claus myth. And so that's why something like A Christmas Carol, like the whole, is more worker motivated than the children behaving thing, because they hadn't made quite that switch yet, culturally speaking. But something like A Christmas Carol and some of these other things where it really kind of puts a focus on the fact that people like a darker edge to their myths.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of your early fairy tales and folk tales are way more
terrifying.
Yeah, they're way more brutal than something like Disney. They're the Disney versions of those tales. And so let's get into the next one, which is, of course, Santa Claus or Sinterklaas or Jolupuki or Dead Moroz or Weihnachtmann or Kris Kringle, which is obviously where Kris Kringle comes from.
Yeah.
Then there's Duchy Lauren and Belsnickel, Yule Lord, Saint Nick, Father Christmas. He has many fucking names. There's even La Befana, which is more of a Krampus-like figure, and we'll get into him shortly. But there's all sorts of versions of the guy who goes from house to house and either punishing or rewarding children for their behavior. But a lot of it was more, like you said, a worker-based, class-based thing. Just like the festivals were more about, say, the poor having an excuse for this big celebration and party throughout the village to kind of get away with similar things that something like a Mischief Night back in Halloween.
Yeah.
And then in the UK, there's a lot of a bonfire night thing, which is more of a after Christmas, before New Year's thing. But this whole region of the year, there's a lot of these kinds of celebrations, and that does give the lower classes, not necessarily carte blanche to do as they will, but an easy excuse, an easy out, because more people are out and about willing to...
There's a reason to party.
Yeah, there's a lot of drinking going on, and what comes with drinking, fighting, fucking,
all the fun
stealing,
shit.
And all of these other things. And so something like the Santa Claus myth does kind of feed into that, where the upper classes are trying to stifle some of that energy, and so you have Santa Claus coming around telling you to be a good boy or girl, or you won't get your gifts, you'll get a stocking full of coal. Not quite as terrifying as his counterpart Krampus, or other variations. Like I said, La Befana was more of a witch type figure who went around and punished children. But with Santa Claus, there is the more original versions of him, the more older versions of that same kind of story tend to, much like every other fairy tale and folk legend, tend to be a lot darker. And so where the punishment we heard was stocking full of coal, or, you won't get these nice gifts, you'll be put on the naughty list. Back then it was, this either Santa or this other dude is going to come and beat the shit out of you, or kill you, or carry you off to some terrible place.
Yeah, he's going to whip that ass.
But, so, obviously we all know Santa Claus and the various versions of that, and Kris Kringle, and all the different magic, and the elves, and now that it's more focused on gnomes, I think they're trying to make that transition in our lifetime because now most people think of elves, they think of Tolkien elves instead of the little short dudes. Anyways.
I like Keebler personally.
Yeah, those are.
They make some bomb-ass cookies. Those are my dudes.
But since we mentioned him, we'll go ahead and get into him, and that's Krampus. So with Krampus, that does kind of include the whole Germanic, and since we're discussing Icelandic and Celtic, like the whole European tradition of that's where Christmas and stuff comes from. So we were just talking about elves and dwarves, like that's also within that whole region.
Basically, it's all from the Alpine region.
Yeah, so it makes sense that a lot of that lore does feed into something like Christmas and the various pagan calendar. And like we said, one of the things was beating the Coughlin, which is a Celtic for the Latin calends, which is just year. And that was like, they're beating away the bad year. And there's various traditions that followed that. And one of them is beating things with a birch rod or a group of reeds, which is one of what we just said, Krampus. That's kind of his trademark, is beating the shit out of you with a rod or some reeds or there's various versions of it, and there's various versions of Krampus. I'm actually reading Brahms' novel about Krampus. It's like a whole Krampus versus Santa Claus conspiracy adventure novel. Like it's pretty crazy. I recommend that one.
Obviously, there's the movie that was huge a few years ago.
Like the dozen or so sequels and remakes
all
and
the
so.
Redbox knockoffs.
Yeah, and one that I like is, since we do talk a lot about Stephen King on this podcast, his son Joe Hill has a pretty good book called Nosferatu, which is about this guy, Charlie Manx, who is a Krampus-style figure who punishes kids and takes them to a place called Christmas Land. And Christmas Land is basically full of dead children. It's very holiday. It looks like what it sounds like when I say Christmas Land, but then like all of the little dudes there are like evil little sharp tooth beings. But
isn't this book on our
it is on our reading list.
Hey,
It's
awesome.
towards the end of our reading list, so we probably got a while before we
got a while, but it's something to look forward to.
Yeah. We'll try to make it around Christmas. If not this next year Christmas, then the next. We'll see. But it is a good Christmas horror novel, and since we're talking Krampus, there is other Krampus-like figures that we can discuss. Like there's one from the French region, I believe. That's
Hans Trapp, man, better known as the Christmas Scarecrow. Yes, from the Alsace region. Basically he was just a bloodthirsty brute who punished naughty children. Don't know how, just that's all I could find on him, that he punished naughty children. But he coexisted with Chris Kindle, who was the host of Christmas, and Saint Nick, who obviously everyone knows brought gifts to good children.
referenced both of those as Santa Claus variations, so you get the point. He's a Krampus to Santa Claus like guy for Chris Kindle.
Yes, kids were terrified of him. But yeah, since we were talking Krampus, another great German and Austrian folklore legend, I guess I should say, is Frau Perchta. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, to be honest with you. I hope I
Like
didn't
Frau
butcher-
Perkta.
There we go. Hopefully I didn't butcher it too bad. Apologies. But she's better known as the Spinning Room Lady or the Christmas Witch. But she had a beaked nose made of iron. She was completely dressed in rags, basically just this old crone, usually had a cane, just this withered old hag, basically. But she would go around and disembowel any spinstress that did not finish their work.
Very
Once
similar
again.
to the Yule Cat.
Yeah, once again, capitalist motivation.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like that, there's all sorts of variations of Krampus, and we could continue down that route. But, like you said, probably because, his popularity is growing somewhat recently, probably half due to the Brahm novel and half due to the movies that we just mentioned. And so you want to transition to some of those things?
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to get into is we feel like Christmas horror movies are kind of overlooked. There's those few and far between that are big and everyone knows, such as this first one I'm going to get into. But there's a lot that are just not only overlooked, but a lot are very underrated, very, very good. Not all, some are just a fun watch, but a lot are very good. So we're going to get into a few. The first one, since we just discussed them, going to be Krampus from 2015. It's a supernatural horror comedy. It's got a cast including Adam Scott, Toni Collette, David Koechner. It's directed by Michael Dougherty. But it's about a boy who was bad at Christmas, accidentally summons the festive demon to his house.
I mean, yeah, Krampus is great, and there's, like I said, like a dozen or so sequels and remakes or whatever, but that's the one that really matters, and as we just kind of went over a lot of the lore anyways, that's the movie does a pretty decent job of sticking to being loyal to the origin story. But one that doesn't really stick close to the quote-unquote origin story is Jack Frost from 1997.
Oh, I remember that. Fun story about this. My mom accidentally rented this instead of the Michael Keaton one that came out the next year.
The comedy with they did the Campbell's commercials.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom actually rented that when I was a kid. So
this one's also kind of a comedy, but it is a way more horror based comedy than anything. It's got like Shannon Elizabeth, who did some comedy, Scott McDonald, Christopher Alport. It's directed by Michael Cooney, and so obviously we all know about Jack Frost, but this Jack Frost is different. This Jack Frost is a notorious serial killer, and he's about to be going. He's going to be executed, and obviously there's an accident. There's several movies like this. There's an accident. He escapes, but not before he's turned into a mutant snowman, which it is just as absurd as it sounds, but it works in this movie. And so bodies start to pile up, and the sheriff that originally caught him has to, try to stop him. But now he's a snowman, so how do you stop a snowman? I'm not entirely sure.
Well, hair dryers. That's how you would stop the snowman, bro. Anyway, let's move on. So, one of my personal favorites, my childhood classic, was Santa's Sleigh. Come out in 2005. It was a slasher black comedy. It had my boy Bill Goldberg playing Santa. Yeah, he does. I don't think he does it, but he should have. He did a lot of brutal shit though, but had a lot of people in the movie, including Chris Kattan, Fran Drescher. It was written and directed by David Steinman. But anyway, so here's the gist of the movie. Riding in on a sleigh of hell deer, which look more like buffalo sent straight from hell, Santa comes to Hell Township. I think it was in like North Carolina or something. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But the town of Hell Township, and slaughters the townspeople in various holiday-themed ways, including using Christmas tree stars as shurikens and drowning a woman in eggnog. Well, apparently Santa is the virgin birth of Satan, and Christmas was originally his day of slaying. That is, until he lost in a game of curling to an angel, and he was sentenced to deliver gifts on Christmas for 1,000 years. Well, time's up.
So yeah, Bill Goldberg is awesome, and so is that movie. But I have another good one for you.
How about, let's get a little more serious. Let's drop a couple serious ones.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. One of my favorite ones. It's more serious. It's less comedy anyway. Silent Night, Deadly Night from 1984.
Brutal.
Starring Lillian Siobhan, Tom Narrow, and Gilmer McCormick. Directors, Charles E. Seller Jr., and quite an apt name is Little Billy was traumatized as a boy after seeing his parents killed by a man dressed as Santa, which, traumatic, thank you. Now that he's out of the orphanage, of course, he has decided to become Santa himself, which, and he punishes those who he deems to be naughty, and traumatized child, rather, wants to be Santa Claus to punish the naughty boys. Like, you can go ahead and assume how this movie goes.
So, it's been years since I've seen it, but I'm pretty sure there's a scene where he goes back to the fucking orphanage, dude, and, like, it's brutal.
Yeah.
It was banned in several countries for a long time, and, like, I get it, but, like, it's dope.
It's heavy on the horror side of the horror Christmas movie.
All right, so the last one we're really get into here, we have to bring up Black Christmas. Now, I'm talking the OG, 1974. It's a horror mystery, for those who don't know. A cast including Olivia Hussey, John Saxon, and Margot Kidder. The director was Bob Clark. Well, for those who don't know, as the story goes, as winter break starts, a group of sorority sisters begin to receive anonymous phone calls. One of the girls initially eggs him on, just really starts fucking with a guy, but she stops because soon he starts threatening them. Well, shortly after that, one of the girls in the house goes missing, and a local girl is murdered. That leads the girls to start thinking that the serial killer's on the loose. Better watch out. But they don't realize just how close the killer is. Now, the original is a fucking masterpiece. It's a great movie. It really, a lot of people say it kind of started the slasher genre, and that's an argument to be made. But like,
does give a I know what you did last winter vibe.
Exactly, man. Exactly, but it's dope as fuck. And honestly, there's 2 remakes. There's one that I believe was in like 2006-ish. Don't quote me on that. But that one's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, that one's really good. Kind of updated it a bit, but like maybe just because I was the perfect age to see it at that time. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. There was another one in 2019 that apparently changed up quite a bit, but made it really good. Made it their own. I've not seen it, but I'll have to check that out. So yeah, that's the last one we're really going to get into, but there are a few other suggestions I have for you. Some other ones to check out would be Silent Night, Christmas Horror Story. If you haven't seen Christmas Horror Story, it's actually, the director's the same guy that did Ginger Snaps, and it's set in the same town, and you got like William Shatner narrating a bunch of mini stories, like including like zombie elves like getting slaughtered by Santa and shit. Like, it's pretty fucking dope. But like, he ties the whole thing together. It's crazy, it's funny, it's great. Just check it out if you haven't seen it. Another movie I saw as a kid was Christmas Cadaver. Old school cheesy zombie movie set at Christmas. It's exactly what you think it would be. A couple more serious ones would be P2 and The Lodge. Check those out if you haven't seen them. Couple other super cheesy ones would be Santa Jaws and The Gingerbread Man. Now, we got a couple suggestions on here that it's kind of iffy putting them on a horror, but we're going to throw them on here. The Nightmare Before Christmas, they're obviously why, obvious reasons. The other one we throw in is The Grinch, because, well, go ahead. What's your reason?
I mean, I would say The Grinch, he's basically a green Krampus, in, at least the lore and the build-up of the culture over time from when we got him back in the day. He's not necessarily a villain at the end of the story, obviously, but at the beginning he is very much I'm gonna ruin Christmas or I'm gonna punish the Who's type of thing. So he's not really Krampus, but he gives off the vibe. And to me...
all right, Grinch is Krampus-ish.
Yeah, because to me he is kind of the first Christmas spook that a child might come across in our society or our day and age anyways, and so okay. I kind of just like to put him up there as
All right, well, those are our iffy suggestions. And all right, I gotta throw one more on here. A lot of people may not consider this a horror movie, and that will be a whole discussion that comes at some point, and we'd like you to chime in on that as well. But Gremlins is my go-to horror flick for Christmas. That's my shit.
So with the Gremlins, we're going to make 2 promises here, starting with the Gremlins. And with the Gremlins, we're going to post a poll because we want all of you to join in the debate. Is Gremlins a Christmas movie? And
so check out our Facebook so you can see it.
And when we get a good bunch of, polls, we might start one of our New Year episodes with that debate, with y'all's feedback. We both have an opinion. It's not necessarily the same, not necessarily that different. We'll dive into that in the future, and that is our first promise to you, is that the Gremlins debate will be coming. The second promise is that since this is our first Christmas episode, and we're still getting started in this podcast world, we promise to have a more in-depth, detailed Christmas episode for you next year, where some of the stuff that we mentioned today will come up, but we'll do the homework and have a much more precise, detailed episode for you about that.
We'll go more in depth with some of the scarier aspects of the old folklore and things like that.
Yeah. And so that is basically it for today's episode. But one thing that we do want to tell you is, if you want more of our Christmas opinions and our Christmas ideas and what we think of Christmas, you can end this episode and go right over to the next episode of Blunt Talk, which will be the Christmas episode of that podcast, where you'll get a little more fun, a little less spooky. But that's all we really have for you this Christmas, and we hope you have a good Christmas. And don't forget to follow us and all of that. But most importantly, have a Merry Christmas.
Keep it strange.
Signing off.